Hello, this is Cynthia Sue Larson with Reality Shifters, and I'm here today talking about Kurt Gödel, his idea of incompleteness, reality shifts, and reality residue. And how does all this connect? Well, let's start with Albert Einstein and his friendship, his very close friendship with Kurt Gödel. You may wonder, why would it be that Albert Einstein would have such an interest in Gödel? But actually, Gödel is famous for many discoveries, but I think the top on that list would be the time that he came up with a different category other than right and wrong in the field of logic. For Western thinking and mathematics and logic, this was huge. He came up with the idea of undecidable, and he proved it. So having an idea is one thing. In the field of mathematics, if you're able to prove it using mathematical proofs, this is extraordinary. And truly, Gödel's proof was extraordinary. It was likened to an earthquake by Karl Popper. John von Neumann commented, "Logic will never be the same again." So what was it that Gödel actually said? Well, when he first announced his finding that was in his paper, this was September of 1930, and he summed it up in a sentence that went pretty much ignored at the conference where he presented it. He said, "Given the consistency of classical mathematics, one can even give examples of sentences which, although correct in content, are unprovable in the formal system of classical mathematics." Now, that does seem to me a little bit benign, a little bit innocuous, but then when he backed it up with a mathematical proof showing that even things, the foundations of mathematics that we assume to be rock solid based on axioms that have unshakable foundations, as Karl Popper said, this was an earthquake, because truly Kurt Gödel was able to shake this to the ground. Now, actually, Gödel was a follower of Leibniz, and he was really amazed and impressed by the ideas that Leibniz put forth, having to do with the idea of principles underlying what we would call laws of all of our sciences. And these underlying principles, these foundational concepts, such as elegance and simplicity, continuancy, constancy, and these sorts of things, are the hallmark of what we look for when we find our strongest possible theories, as well as making sure that the data fits the theory itself. So this is the basis of all science. I'm going to come back to that, but first I want to have a disclaimer, which is to say, yes, I already know that that Kurt Gödel did have some emotional issues and some psychological, what we would call idiosyncrasies at the least, in which, for example, he would only eat food that had been tested by his wife, Adele, and during a time that she was hospitalized for 6 months, he was unable to eat, actually, and he basically starved to death, which is a serious tragedy. So obviously he's not typical in any way, shape, or form, so there is that. But having said that, I'd like to go on and talk about some of the ideas that Leibniz had, that Gödel was fascinated in. And this has to do with a case of some missing documentation, which I find really interesting. Because now I've mentioned the paradox. I think you understand it. Most of you, I think, are getting it, that there exists a kind of quasi-paradoxical self-negation. These are the words of John von Neumann, referring to the way the formal logic system emerges out of itself to make statements about itself. So this is what science actually does when you get down to the core of it. Definitely it's true of mathematics, and definitely it's true of anything that we study, including something like consciousness, quantum physics, and so forth. So let's go back to that mystery. Now, the mystery is where it gets interesting to me, because Kurt Gödel was really fascinated with Leibniz. In fact, he believed that Leibniz had developed anticipations of game theory, the paradoxes of set theory, cloaked in the language of concepts, but exactly the same, Helmholtz's resonance theory of hearing, and the conservation of energy law. Yet, Gödel was unable to find this evidence that Leibniz had ever written such things, despite numerous threads appearing to lead in those directions. And so there was a mutual friend of Albert Einstein's and also Kurt Gödel, that's Oscar Morgenstern at Princeton University, and he called Gödel's beliefs about such things fantasies, because there was no evidence to suggest that all of these little trails that Gödel could find actually went anywhere. But this sounds like something else to me, and that's what I'm doing this video about today and this blog post. And basically, what it sounds like when I start hearing about something such as missing papers and writings, and especially when I heard that he'd noted there had been specific places, now this is Kurt Gödel, hearing there had been specific places where the writings of Leibniz ought to be, where he had seen that they had been, but now they weren't. It's like everything would lead right up to it, refer to something that wasn't there, and it was gone. And right at that point, I recognized a familiar pattern, something that I have been documenting for 20 years now, and that is reality shifts, what's also now called Mandela effect. And what's happening is now the official history no longer matches what we know to be true from our own personal experience. So when I notice writings that have changed or gone missing, then I realize there's a possibility there may have been a reality shift at that point in time where things appear, disappear, transform, or transport. And what I've presented in my books, my website, my newsletter every month is continuing evidence to suggest that indeed quantum phenomena occur, not just at the quantum so-called scale below the Planck scale, but it's happening everywhere, and occasionally we witness these things. So one of the best ways to experience reality shifts is to pay attention. I would now present that it makes sense to me that knowing that some things can never be proved and that there will always be indeterminacy at the root of even our hardest, most fact-based math and science might just be enough to invite these experiences into our life, as I believe may have been the case for Kurt Gödel. So until next time, this is Cynthia Sue Larson with RealityShifters.com. And I'd like to invite you to keep asking what I consider the most positive possible question: how good can it get? Thank you so much.